Most people think camping is peaceful, a place to unplug, to feel safe, to get away from everything. But sometimes, the things you hear out there aren't random. Sometimes people leave without explaining why. Sometimes you're not as alone as you think. And sometimes, the place you went to escape is the thing that answers back. Tonight, these are 6 true camping horror stories that start quietly and don't let you go. Microte. Before we begin, comment where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I chose that campsite because it was empty. At least, it looked that way. No cars, no tents, no smoke. Just a small clearing off a forest road, surrounded by pine trees and quiet. The kind of quiet you drive hours to find. It was late afternoon when I pulled in. The sun was already dropping behind the trees. I remember checking my mirrors before turning off the road, out of habit. Not because I expected to see anyone. The road behind me stayed empty. I parked, killed the engine, and listened. Nothing. No voices, no movement. Just wind moving through branches somewhere far above. I stepped out and stretched. The air smelled like dirt and cold needles. It felt clean, untouched. That mattered to me. I wasn't trying to meet people. I wasn't looking for conversation. I wanted a night where no one needed anything from me. That's why I picked dispersed camping. No reservations, no staff, no neighbors close enough to hear you breathe. I walked the perimeter before setting anything up. Slow, deliberate. I checked the ground, the trees, the space behind the clearing. There were no tire tracks except mine, no trash, no footprints that stood out. It felt unused. I set my tent near the edge of the clearing, close enough to the trees for cover, far enough to see anyone coming. By the time I finished, the light was gone. Not dark yet, just that blue-gray moment before night settles in. I made a simple dinner, nothing fancy, just something hot. I didn't bother with a fire. I didn't feel like drawing attention to myself. That night was uneventful. I slept fine, better than I usually do. No sounds, no dreams I remember. Morning came quietly. The cold woke me first, then the light filtering through the tent walls. I unzipped the door and stepped outside. That's when I saw the fire ring. It was about 20 feet from my tent, a circle of stones, blackened in the middle, fresh. Not old ash, not scattered, a tight ring, clean edges, like it had been used recently. I stood there for a moment, trying to remember, trying to convince myself I'd missed it the day before. But I hadn't built a fire. I was sure of that. And when I arrived, I would have noticed this. I always do. I didn't touch it. I just stared, longer than I meant to. Then I told myself the obvious thing. Someone must have been here earlier, packed up, left before I arrived. That made sense. It had to. I turned back toward my tent, started making coffee, acted like nothing was wrong. But I kept glancing at that circle of stones, because it looked like it hadn't been cold for very long. I tried to move on with my morning, coffee, a granola bar, the small routines that make things feel normal. I told myself I was overthinking it, that the fire ring meant nothing. People pass through places like this all the time. They don't leave signs. They don't announce themselves. Still, I walked around again, slower this time. I circled the clearing, closer to the trees, watching the ground more carefully than before. That's when I noticed the footprints. They weren't obvious, not clean impressions. Just disturbances, flattened needles, dirt pressed down in spots where it shouldn't have been. One set, not leading toward the road, not clearly leaving, just there. I crouched and looked longer than I should have. They weren't mine, different tread, different size. I stood up and felt that familiar pull in my stomach, the one you get when you realize something doesn't line up. I scanned the tree line. Nothing moved. No voices. No doors closing. No engines. I told myself the same thing again. Someone must have walked through earlier, before I arrived, before I noticed. That explanation worked, for a moment. Then I saw the bottle. It was tucked near a fallen log, half hidden, clear plastic, empty. I picked it up. Not mine. I don't bring bottles like that when I camp. I never have. The cap was still attached, the label torn halfway off. Recently used. I looked around again, harder this time. The forest stayed still. That's when I felt it. Not fear, not yet. Awareness. The sense that I was no longer alone in a place that should have been empty. I packed the bottle away with my trash. Didn't know why. Just didn't want to leave it where it was. I told myself I'd leave later that day. Find another spot, one closer to people. But the longer I stood there, the more that felt like an overreaction. So I stayed. I spent the afternoon hiking nearby trails, never too far from the campsite. Every time I came back, I checked. The tent was the same, my gear untouched, nothing missing, nothing moved. By evening, I started to feel embarrassed, at myself. I laughed it off while making dinner, shook my head. People leave trash, people leave fire rings. That's all this was. When night fell, I sat quietly and listened. The forest made its usual sounds. Insects, wind, branches shifting. Normal. I went to bed early, but it took longer to fall asleep. And when I did, I kept waking up. Not from noise, from the feeling that something had changed. The second night felt different before it even started. The air was heavier, not warmer, just still. I noticed it when I stopped moving. No breeze, no shifting branches. The forest felt like it was holding its breath. I cooked quickly, didn't sit around like the night before, didn't check my phone. I kept looking past the fireless clearing, toward the trees. Nothing was there. That was the problem. I went into my tent early, zipped it shut, laid back and stared at the ceiling. I told myself to sleep. I don't know how long I was lying there before I heard it. Not footsteps, not exactly. Pressure, something compressing the ground. Slowly. It wasn't close, but it wasn't far either. I held my breath without realizing it. The sound stopped. Then it started again. A few steps. Then nothing. No rhythm, no pace, just movement. I didn't move. Didn't reach for my light. Didn't unzip the tent. I waited. Minutes passed. Maybe longer. Nothing else happened. Eventually, exhaustion won. I must have fallen asleep. Morning came without warning. No memory of dreams. Just that same cold, quiet air. I stepped outside carefully. The clearing looked the same, at first. Then I noticed my chair. I always fold it flat and lay it against the tree next to my tent. Always. That morning, it was open, turned slightly, facing the tree line. I stood there, staring at it, trying to picture myself leaving it like that. I couldn't. I walked around again, slower than before. The ground near the trees looked different, pressed down, like someone had stood there for a while, watching. I felt that pull in my stomach again, stronger this time. I checked my gear, counted things without meaning to. Everything was there, nothing missing. That almost made it worse. I told myself I'd leave after breakfast, pack up, drive somewhere else. But I didn't. I stayed. I don't know why. Maybe because nothing had actually happened. Maybe because leaving felt like admitting something I wasn't ready to say out loud. By the afternoon, the forest felt normal again. Birds returned, the wind picked up. I convinced myself the night had been a trick of fatigue, of nerves. That explanation worked, until the sun started to go down. I decided to leave. Not in a rush, not in panic, just deliberately. I packed my bag, folded the tent halfway, loaded the car while there was still daylight. I told myself I'd drive out, find another spot, maybe even head back toward town. Before I left, I took one last walk around the clearing. I don't know why. Habit, maybe, or the need to be sure. That's when I saw it, on the far edge of the clearing, near where the trees grew close together. The ground there was different, not footprints, a circle, small, compressed, like a tent had been pitched there. Recently, the dirt was darker, the needles flattened in a way that hadn't had time to spring back. I stood there longer than I should have, trying to picture someone setting up camp that close, without me noticing, without a sound. I backed away slowly. That's when I realized something else. The circle hadn't been there the day before. I would have seen it. I always check the edges of a site before settling in. I looked toward the road, still empty, no engine sounds, no movement. I felt that pull in my stomach tighten. Whoever had been there with me. I didn't finish packing. I didn't take the tent down. I just sat on the edge of my trunk for a long time, listening, waiting for something to make sense. Nothing did. The thought came to me then, quiet, uninvited. What if they were still nearby, not watching, not approaching, just staying close? I checked the time. Plenty of daylight left, enough to leave safely. I closed the trunk, but instead of driving away, I stopped. I told myself one more night wouldn't hurt, that I'd stay alert, that I'd leave at first light. That was the moment, the one I crossed without realizing it. That night, nothing happened. No sounds, no movement, no pressure on the ground. That was the worst part. The forest was too quiet, not the normal kind. No insects, no distant wind, no branches brushing together. It felt emptied. I sat inside my tent with the light off, fully dressed, keys in my pocket. Every few minutes I checked my watch. Time moved slowly, unevenly. I tried not to think about the circle near the trees, about how close it was, about how easily I could have missed it. I told myself that if someone was out there, I would hear them. But that thought didn't help, because what if they weren't moving? I focused on my breathing, counted it, lost count. Hours passed like that. Then something changed. Not a sound, a feeling. The sense of weight shifting in the air. Like when someone enters a room without speaking. I froze. My eyes fixed on the thin seam at the bottom of the tent, where the fabric lifted slightly from the ground. I watched that line longer than I've ever watched anything. Waiting for a shadow, a shape, anything. Nothing came. I don't know how long I sat there before the ground pressed down. Just once, slow, careful. Not close enough to touch the tent, not far enough to ignore. I closed my eyes without meaning to, opened them again immediately. The pressure lifted. Silence returned. No footsteps away, no retreat, just absence. I didn't sleep after that. When the sky finally began to lighten, I didn't feel relief, only exhaustion and certainty. I left at first light. I didn't pack carefully, didn't check the ground one last time. I just collapsed the tent, shoved everything into the trunk, and drove. The forest didn't react. No sound of movement behind me, no branches snapping, no rush to follow. That almost made it worse. The road out was empty, long, quiet. I kept checking my mirrors, not because I saw anything, because I expected to. When I finally reached the main road, I pulled over, hands still shaking, breathing shallow. I sat there longer than I meant to. That's when I noticed the dirt on my bumper, handprints. Not clear, not perfect, just smears. Low, as if someone had leaned there. I stared at them until the shapes stopped making sense. I wiped them off with my sleeve. Didn't know why I did it that way. Didn't want to take a picture. I drove home without stopping again. For days after, I slept with the lights on, listened harder than I ever had. Nothing followed me. Nothing showed up. But sometimes late at night, I still think about that campsite, about how careful I was, how much I checked, how sure I was that I was alone, and how wrong I turned out to be. Because whoever was there didn't want to be seen. They just wanted to be close. The campsite wasn't empty, but it wasn't busy either. A few tents were scattered across the clearing. far enough apart that you couldn't hear conversations, close enough that you didn't feel completely alone. That was why I chose it. I arrived just before sunset, parked, unloaded, nodded briefly at a couple across the way. No one said anything. That felt normal. I set my tent facing the tree line, not for any reason, just habit. The light faded quickly after that. By the time I finished eating, the campsite had gone quiet. No music, no laughter, just the low sound of wind moving through leaves. I zipped myself into the tent and lay back, phone off, light off. I wasn't tired yet, just resting. That's when I heard footsteps. Slow, steady, gravel shifting under weight. I stayed still. The steps came closer, passed just outside my tent, then kept going. No pause, no hesitation. I waited for a voice, a cough, anything. Nothing. The footsteps faded into the dark. I told myself it was nothing. Someone heading to the bathroom, someone stretching their legs. That made sense. A few minutes later, I heard them again. Same speed, same direction, right past my tent. This time I sat up slightly, listened harder. Still no sound besides the steps. They didn't slow down, didn't turn their head, didn't acknowledge the tent at all. They just walked by. When the sound disappeared again, I realized something. No one else's tent was close enough for that path to make sense, and whoever it was, they were walking the same route, again. I stayed still for a long time after that, listening, waiting for the footsteps to return. They didn't, at least not right away. I told myself it was coincidence, that I was paying too much attention to something normal. People walk around campsites at night. They always have. I lay back down, closed my eyes. I was just starting to relax when I heard it again. The same sound, the same pace, gravel shifting, slow, even. It passed my tent exactly the same way as before, close enough that I could tell it was only one person. No drag, no limp, no rush, just walking. When the sound faded, I checked my phone. 20 minutes had passed. I stared at the screen longer than I needed to. That's when it started to feel strange. Not because someone was walking around, but because of how consistent it was. The timing, the direction, always the same. I sat up and listened harder this time. No talking, no keys, no flashlight clicking on or off, just footsteps. I unzipped the tent slightly, just enough to see out. The path was empty. The other tents were dark, no movement, no silhouettes. The footsteps came back again, same route, same distance. I zipped the tent closed and stayed still. I started counting after that, not out loud, just in my head. Every pass came within the same window, not exact, but close enough. I stopped trying to explain it. Instead, I asked myself a different question. Why was their path so close to my tent? There was no reason for it. No bathroom that way, no shortcut, no trail entrance, just my tent, and then the trees. When the footsteps came again, I didn't move at all. I held my breath. They passed, and for a brief moment, they slowed, just slightly, then kept going. That was when I realized I wasn't imagining it. Someone was walking past my tent on purpose. The footsteps stopped sometime before morning. I didn't know when. I just realized they hadn't come back. When the sky finally lightened, I felt drained, not relieved, just worn down. I stepped outside slowly. The campsite looked normal, too normal. Other campers were already moving. Zippers, car doors, low voices. I watched them closely. No one looked tired. No one avoided eye contact. No one acted like they'd been walking around all night. I thought about asking someone, then didn't. It felt strange to bring it up in daylight. Hard to explain without sounding paranoid. So I stayed. I told myself the first night had been a fluke. Someone restless. Someone with insomnia. The day passed quietly. I hiked nearby trails, kept busy, stayed visible. By evening, I almost believed myself. Almost. That night, I stayed awake on purpose. Light off. Tent unzipped just enough to hear. The first set of footsteps came sooner than the night before. Same sound, same pace. They passed my tent without stopping. then came back, and again. The gaps between them were shorter this time, 10 minutes, then 8, then 5. I stopped counting. At some point, I realized something else. They were never coming from the same direction twice, always passing, never approaching, like a loop. I sat up, heart beating hard enough that I worried it could be heard. When the footsteps passed again, I leaned forward, close to the opening. The sound slowed, not much, just enough. I froze. The footsteps resumed. I didn't see anything, didn't hear breathing, didn't hear fabric, just the gravel, shifting, moving past me, over and over. By midnight, my nerves felt raw. This wasn't someone wandering. This was deliberate. Someone was pacing my tent. I didn't sleep. I just waited. Sometime after midnight, the footsteps came back, closer than before. I could hear the gravel shift in individual steps, the weight, the balance. Whoever it was, they were careful. I sat up slowly, didn't unzip the tent, didn't turn on the light. I told myself that if they passed again, I would step outside. Just once, just to see. The footsteps returned. Same pace, same distance. When they were right beside my tent, I stood up. I unzipped the door and stepped out. The night air felt cold against my face. They were already there, not facing me, walking past. So close I could have reached out and touched them. A person, average height, dark clothing, no flashlight, no bag, no visible gear. They didn't look at me, didn't react, didn't even slow down. They just kept walking, straight ahead, into the dark. I stood there, frozen, waiting for them to stop, to turn around, to acknowledge me in any way. They didn't. The sound of their footsteps faded into the trees. I stayed outside for a long time after that. My heart was pounding. My hands were shaking. I realized something then. They hadn't been avoiding me. They hadn't been curious. They had been comfortable. Like this path, this routine, was normal to them. I went back into my tent and zipped it shut. I didn't sit, didn't lie down. I stayed standing. And I knew I wouldn't be leaving in the morning. I would be leaving as soon as the sun came up. After that, I didn't try to sleep. I stayed inside the tent, standing, listening. The footsteps came back, same pace, same distance. They passed my tent like nothing had happened, like I hadn't been standing there minutes earlier. Then they came again and again. I checked my phone, 5 minutes, then 4, then less. The pattern tightened. I counted at first, lost count, started again. It didn't help. Every time the sound reached the spot beside my tent, my body tensed, waiting for it to stop. It never did. I tried sitting down, tried lying back. Neither felt possible. The footsteps didn't circle the campsite, didn't wander. They followed one path, past my tent, into the dark, then back again, like a line drawn only for me. At some point, I realized something worse. They never hesitated, not once. No curiosity, no caution, just repetition, like this was familiar, like they had done this before. I pressed my ear against the tent wall, listened for breathing, heard nothing, just gravel, shifting, again. I don't know how long it went on. Time stopped meaning anything. There was only the sound, and the space beside my tent where it always happened. When the footsteps finally stopped, it wasn't sudden. They just didn't come back. The silence felt heavier than the noise ever had. I stood there until the sky began to lighten, too tired to feel relief, too aware to relax. I left as soon as there was enough light to see. I didn't wait for breakfast, didn't make coffee, didn't say goodbye to anyone. I packed fast, hands shaking more than I wanted to admit. As I was loading the car, one of the other campers walked past. An older man, polite, casual. He nodded at me. "Rough night?" he asked. I hesitated. Then I asked him something else. "Did you see anyone walking around last night? Just pacing?" He frowned slightly. "No," he said. "Didn't hear a thing." I asked another couple nearby, then another camper. Same answer. No one had been walking around. No one had seen anyone. Most of them had slept fine. That's when I looked at the ground around my tent. I hadn't noticed it before. The gravel was disturbed, pressed down, not everywhere, just along one narrow path. It ran past where my tent had been, straight, clean, no footprints leading away, no footprints coming in, just that line, like someone had walked it again and again, only there. I stood there for a long time, then I got in my car and left. I didn't check my mirrors this time. I didn't need to, because whatever had been walking past my tent was never trying to follow me. It already knew where I was. The road was empty, not quiet, not peaceful, just empty. I had been driving for hours by then, past midnight, far enough from any town that the radio had gone to static. The headlights were the only thing keeping me alert, that narrow tunnel of light stretching forward, everything else swallowed by darkness. I checked the mirrors out of habit. That's when I saw them, another set of headlights, far back, centered, steady. I didn't think much of it at first. It was a highway. Cars appear, cars disappear. That's how it usually works. I kept driving. 10 minutes passed, maybe more. The headlights were still there, same distance, not gaining, not falling back. I adjusted my speed slightly, just to test it. They adjusted too. I moved into the right lane, gave them room to pass. They didn't. The road ahead stayed clear, miles of open asphalt, no reason to hang back. I checked the mirrors again. The headlights hadn't changed position, not closer, not farther, just there. I told myself it was coincidence, cruise control, same speed. That explanation worked, for a while, until I slowed down again, and the distance stayed exactly the same. That's when I realized something. They weren't behind me. They were keeping pace. I tried not to focus on it, kept my eyes forward, hands steady on the wheel. The road stayed straight, empty in every direction. I slowed down a little more, not enough to be obvious, just enough to change the rhythm. The headlights slowed with me, still there, still centered. I tapped the brakes once, light, brief. They responded immediately, no delay, no confusion, like they were watching for it. I changed lanes again, left this time. The headlights followed, same distance, same alignment. That's when my chest started to feel tight. I checked the speedometer, checked it again. I wasn't going fast. I wasn't crawling either. I told myself it was cruise control, someone tired, someone just matching speed without thinking. That explanation should have been enough. It wasn't. I sped up. The engine responded. The road blurred slightly. The headlights grew brighter for a moment, then settled back into the same position. I eased off. They eased off. I turned the radio on, then off again. The static felt louder than silence. I checked the mirrors more often now, too often. The headlights never drifted, never wobbled, never hesitated. They didn't feel like a car trying to pass. They felt like a marker, like something fixed in place behind me. I told myself to ignore it, to keep driving. But a thought kept pushing its way in. What if they weren't waiting to pass? What if this was exactly where they wanted to be? Time stretched. The road didn't change. Neither did the headlights. They stayed where they were, perfectly placed, like they belonged there. I checked the mirror again, then again. I started doing it without thinking, every few seconds, every straightaway. The headlights looked different now, sometimes brighter, sometimes dimmer. Not like they were speeding up or slowing down, like they were breathing. I shook my head at that thought. Fatigue, that's all it was. I rolled the window down. Cold air rushed in, sharp enough to wake me up. The headlights stayed steady. I sped up again, more than before. The engine hummed louder. The road markers blurred. For a moment, I thought I'd lost them. Then they were back. Same distance, same place. I felt my jaw tighten. I slowed almost to the speed limit, then below it. Anyone normal would have passed by now. They didn't. I checked the dashboard clock. Another 20 minutes had gone by. No exits, no signs. No other cars, just me and the headlights. I started imagining what I'd see if they ever pulled up beside me. A driver, a face, something that would make sense. But the thought didn't bring comfort. because if they pulled alongside me, this would end. And whatever was happening back there clearly didn't want to end. I adjusted the mirror slightly, just a few degrees. The headlights stayed centered anyway. That's when my hands started to shake. Not badly, just enough to notice. I tightened my grip on the wheel, kept driving, and wondered how long something could follow without ever needing to arrive. I pulled off the highway, not suddenly, not in panic, just enough to change the situation. A rest stop appeared ahead, dim lights, empty parking spaces. I slowed down and turned in. The headlights followed. They didn't rush, didn't hesitate. They stayed back as I rolled to a stop. I parked near the far edge of the lot, engine idling, hands still on the wheel. The headlights stopped too, far away, near the entrance. They didn't pull closer. They didn't turn off. They just stayed there. I waited. 10 seconds. 20. Nothing happened. No door opening, no shadow stepping out. Just two lights pointed directly at me. I shut off my engine. The silence felt immediate, heavy. The headlights didn't change. I opened my door slowly and stepped out. The night air felt unreal, too still. I stood beside my car, watching. The headlights stayed on. No movement around them. No sound of gravel, just light. I waited for something to make sense. It didn't. After a long minute, I got back in my car. My hands were shaking now. I didn't try to hide it. I started the engine again. As I pulled back toward the highway, I checked my mirror. The headlights were already moving, not turning, not adjusting, just falling back into position behind me. Same distance, same place. That was when I understood. Stopping didn't break whatever this was. It was part of it. Back on the highway, nothing changed. The road stretched forward, straight, endless. The headlights settled behind me again. Same distance, same position, like they had never stopped. I tightened my grip on the wheel until my fingers ached. I tried speeding up, not suddenly, gradually. The engine pushed harder. The road markers flashed by faster. The headlights stayed where they were. I slowed down again, almost to the point where it felt unsafe. They stayed. I checked the mirrors so often my eyes started to burn. Every time, they were there, unmoved, unbothered. I started talking out loud without realizing it. Short sentences, half-formed thoughts, anything to keep my mind from slipping. I told myself I was tired, that this was what exhaustion felt like. But the thought didn't stick, because fatigue doesn't hold a distance that perfectly. I tried something reckless. I drifted onto the shoulder for just a moment. The rumble strips vibrated through the car. The headlights didn't waver. They didn't react. They just stayed in place. That was when fear finally settled in fully. Not sharp, not sudden, heavy. I realized I had been hoping for something dramatic. A pass, a horn, a mistake. Anything that would prove this was just another driver. But whatever was behind me refused to do anything that would end it. I checked the fuel gauge, lower than I liked. I checked the time. Hours had passed. And still, the headlights hadn't moved an inch. I felt trapped in motion. As long as I drove, they stayed. As long as they stayed, I couldn't stop. The thought came to me then, clear and cold. What if they weren't following me? What if this was the destination? The town lights appeared without warning, a faint glow on the horizon, then street lights, buildings. I slowed down as I entered the outskirts. First traffic signal I'd seen in hours. I stopped. For the first time that night, I waited. The headlights behind me didn't stop with me. They didn't pull up beside my car. They didn't turn. They faded. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just gone. I sat there through the green light, then the next. Cars began to pass, normal ones. I pulled into a gas station and parked under the lights. The brightness felt wrong, too exposed. I got out of the car and looked back toward the road. Nothing. No headlights, no car slowing down, no sign of anything turning off the highway. Inside the station, the clerk barely looked up. I bought coffee I didn't want, stood there longer than necessary. When I finally asked, I kept my voice casual. "Did you see a car come in right behind me? Dark highway, just now." He shook his head. Been quiet all night, he said. I went back outside, checked my mirrors again before pulling out. Old habit. The drive home after that was uneventful, too normal. But even now, sometimes, when I'm driving late, on a straight road, with nothing else around, I catch a pair of headlights in my mirror, perfectly centered, perfectly distant, and I don't slow down to see if they pass, because I already know. I didn't plan to stop there. I just needed a bathroom. I'd been driving for hours, late enough that the road had gone quiet, early enough that I didn't feel completely unsafe yet. The rest area lights appeared suddenly, a small cluster of yellow against the dark. I pulled in. There were a few cars parked, not many, enough to feel normal. The building itself looked old, concrete walls, flat roof, buzzing fluorescent lights inside. I went in without thinking. The bathroom was empty. No footsteps, no voices, just the hum of the lights and the echo of my own movement. I chose the stall closest to the door, habit more than caution. The door shut behind me. I locked it, finished quickly. When I reached for the handle again, it didn't move. I tried once more, harder this time. Nothing. I looked down at the lock. It wasn't broken. It hadn't jammed. It was locked. From the outside. I stood there for a moment, listening, waiting for someone to laugh, to apologize, to say anything at all. No one did. I knocked on the door, not hard, just enough to be heard. "Hey," I said. My voice sounded smaller than I expected. Nothing. I tried the handle again, slower this time, like maybe I'd imagined it the first time. It didn't budge. I pressed my shoulder into the door and pushed. Solid. I knocked again, harder. "Is someone there?" My voice echoed off the tile, came back to me empty. I stopped and listened. At first, there was nothing. Then, faintly, movement. Not inside the bathroom, outside. Footsteps, slow, measured. They passed by the door. I leaned closer to it, put my ear near the metal. "Hello?" I said. The footsteps stopped. I waited for a response, an apology, anything. Nothing came. I knocked again, faster now. The footsteps started moving again, heading away. I felt my stomach tighten. "Wait," I said, louder. The sound faded. I stood there, staring at the door, trying to make sense of it. Someone had been there, close enough to hear me, close enough to unlock the door if they wanted to. They hadn't. The light flickered, just once at first. A quick dip in brightness, then it steadied again. I told myself it didn't mean anything. Old building, old wiring. Still, I shifted my weight and looked up. The fluorescent light hummed louder now, a thin, sharp sound that I hadn't noticed before. Minutes passed. I checked my phone. No signal. The clock on the screen felt wrong, too slow, like time had thickened inside the stall. I knocked again, 3 times. The sound echoed through the bathroom, flat, hollow. Somewhere outside, a door opened, then closed. Footsteps again. More than one set this time. They moved across the floor outside the bathroom, paused, shifted. I pressed my palm flat against the door. "Can you open this?" I asked. My voice sounded calm, too calm. The footsteps stopped. I waited. The light flickered again, longer this time. For a moment the bathroom felt dim, smaller. I knocked harder now, not shouting, but close. No one answered. The footsteps started again. They moved past the door, slower than before. I followed them with my eyes, even though I couldn't see anything. Then they were gone. I slid down until my back hit the wall, sat on the floor. The tile was cold through my clothes. I realized then how quiet it had become. No footsteps, no voices, just the hum of the light and my own breathing. Whatever was happening outside was taking its time. I stood back up and checked the lock again, slowly, carefully. I needed to be sure. The latch moved smoothly when I touched it from the inside. No resistance, no looseness. It wasn't broken. I pushed the door again, harder than before. It didn't shift an inch. That's when the realization settled in. The door wasn't stuck, it was being held. I pressed my forehead against the metal and listened. There it was, breathing. Not close enough to feel, not loud enough to be obvious, just a steady presence on the other side. I swallowed and knocked once more. "Please," I said. The word came out before I could stop it. The breathing didn't change. No footsteps, no movement away. Just someone standing there, holding the door closed. I felt heat rush up my neck, a tight pressure behind my eyes. I hit the door with my fist. Once, twice. The sound echoed violently in the small space. "Open it," I said, still calm, still controlled, still unanswered. The breathing shifted slightly, as if the weight on the door adjusted. That was when fear stopped feeling sharp. It went dull, heavy. Whoever was outside wasn't panicking, wasn't confused. They knew exactly what they were doing, and they weren't in a hurry. I stopped hitting the door. There was no point. Whoever was on the other side wasn't reacting, not flinching, not stepping back, just staying there. I backed away slowly until my shoulders hit the wall behind me. The space felt smaller than it had before, like the air itself had thickened. The breathing continued, steady, patient. I checked my phone again. Still no signal. Battery draining faster than it should have. I thought about yelling, screaming, but something about the silence outside the door stopped me. It felt like that was what they wanted. I slid down to the floor again, sat with my knees pulled in. The light flickered overhead, once, twice. Each time it came back, a little dimmer. The breathing shifted, closer now, not moving away from the door, pressing against it. I could feel it through the metal, a presence leaning in, listening, waiting for something. I covered my mouth without realizing it, tried to quiet my breathing. The idea of being heard felt unbearable. Minutes passed like that, maybe longer. I don't know how long we stayed there, me on one side, them on the other. Neither of us moving, neither of us speaking. Whatever was outside didn't need to rush. They had already trapped me. The door opened without a sound. No click, no warning, just suddenly open. I didn't move at first. I stared at the gap, waiting to see someone step back. A shadow, a foot. There was nothing. The bathroom outside the stall was empty. The lights were steady again, too steady. I stood up slowly and stepped out. No one near the sinks, no one by the door. I checked the main entrance and pushed it open. The parking lot was still there, still quiet. The same cars I remembered were parked in the same places. Engines cold, no doors closing, no movement. I stood there longer than I should have, trying to understand when the door had unlocked and why. Before leaving, I went back inside the bathroom one last time. I looked at the stall door, at the lock. It worked perfectly from the inside. When I stepped back out, I noticed something I hadn't before, the exterior latch. It had been slid back into place, not broken, not forced, set. I got in my car and left. I didn't stop again that night. Even now, I avoid roadside bathrooms when I'm alone, especially the quiet ones, because every time I close a stall door, I think about how easy it was for someone to stand there, silent, patient, holding it shut. I arrived later than I meant to. The sun was already low, throwing long shadows between the trees as I pulled into the campground. Still, it didn't feel empty. There were lights on, campfires going, voices drifting through the air, families finishing dinner, someone laughing near an RV, the soft clatter of cookware being packed away, normal sounds. I found an open site near the middle of the loop, plenty of neighbors on both sides, enough people around that I didn't feel rushed. I set up my tent as daylight faded. The smell of food hung in the air. A radio played quietly somewhere nearby. At one point, a couple walked past with a flashlight, heading toward the bathrooms. A kid rode by on a bike, tires crunching over gravel. I remember thinking it felt crowded for such a remote place. By the time I crawled into my sleeping bag, the campground had settled into that low nighttime hum. murmured conversations, the occasional car door, wind moving through the trees. I fell asleep easily. Sometime later, I woke up. No reason at first, no sound that I could name, just the feeling that something had changed. I lay still and listened. The voices were gone. No laughter, no radios, no distant clink of metal or footsteps on gravel. The campground wasn't quiet the way it had been before. It was empty. I unzipped the tent slowly. Cold air slipped in, the kind that makes you fully awake. I stepped out and looked around. The fire pit at the site next to mine was cold, ashes undisturbed. No glow, no smoke. The picnic table was still set up, paper plates stacked, a half-empty water bottle on its side. No one there. I turned in a slow circle. More sites were dark now, too dark. Where there had been lanterns and string lights, there was nothing. Just silhouettes of empty tables and unoccupied chairs. I walked toward the center of the loop. A tent stood open, zippers undone, sleeping bags still inside. Another site had a cooler out, lid closed, as if someone planned to come back. I didn't see trash, no signs of panic, just absence. A car engine turned over somewhere nearby. I stopped and listened. The sound didn't get closer, didn't move around the loop. It faded. I walked farther. Nearly every campsite was empty now. Some RVs were gone. Some were still parked, doors shut, lights off. It didn't make sense. People don't leave like that, not together, not without saying anything. I stood in the middle of the campground, trying to count how many sites were still occupied. I couldn't find any. I walked farther than I meant to, past my site, past the bathrooms, toward the far end of the campground where the trees grew thicker and the road narrowed. The farther I went, the more signs there were that people had been there recently. A folding chair tipped over beside a fire ring, still warm to the touch when I reached down. A pot sitting on a stove, lid half off. The smell of burned food faint in the air. At one site, a flashlight lay on the ground, still on. The beam pointed uselessly into the dirt. I picked it up and turned it off. The silence pressed in immediately. No generators, no talking, no music, just wind moving through the trees. I called out once. "Hello?" My voice carried farther than I expected. No one answered. I walked to the edge of the campground, where the trees opened toward a trailhead. There were footprints in the dirt, a lot of them. Not scattered, not wandering, all heading in the same direction, away from the campsites. I followed them for a short distance before stopping. The woods beyond were dark, dense, uninviting. Whatever had made people leave hadn't chased them. They had chosen to go, together. And standing there, alone in the middle of an empty campground, I realized something that made my stomach drop. Everyone else had reached the same conclusion, and they hadn't waited to explain it to me. I was heading back toward my tent when I saw the light. A flashlight beam cutting through the trees near the road, moving slowly, carefully. I stopped. "Hey," I called out. The light paused. A man stepped into view, older than me, backpack on, keys already in his hand. He looked surprised to see me, not relieved, more like uncomfortable. "You staying here?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Did everyone leave?" He glanced back toward the trees, then at the empty campsites behind me. "Most of them," he said. I waited for more. He didn't offer it. "Do you know why?" I asked. He shifted his weight, adjusted the strap on his bag. "You didn't hear it last night?" he said. "Hear what?" He didn't answer right away, just shook his head slightly. "If I were you," he said, "I wouldn't stay another night." "That doesn't help," I said. He finally looked at me then, really looked. There was something tired in his eyes, not fear, decision. "We didn't talk about it," he said, "but we all woke up." I opened my mouth to ask more. He stepped past me, toward the road, toward his car. "I'd leave before it gets dark again," he said, without turning around. The flashlight beam disappeared between the trees. I stood there alone, surrounded by campsites that had been full only hours earlier. And for the first time since arriving, I felt something worse than fear. I felt late. Night came faster than I expected. The sky darkened behind the trees, swallowing what little color was left. I stayed near my campsite, pretending that was a choice. Every other site around me was empty now. No lanterns, no voices, no engines starting. Just my tent, my car, and a ring of darkness beyond the firelight. I built a small fire and sat close to it, not for warmth, just to have something solid to look at. The woods didn't sound alive the way they had the night before. No insects, no distant conversations, no music bleeding through the trees, just wind. Then something else, a sound far off, too distant to place, not an animal, not mechanical. It carried through the trees in a way that didn't echo, didn't bounce, like it didn't need to. I froze and listened. It came again, longer this time, low, uneven. I stood up and turned slowly, trying to figure out where it was coming from. Every direction felt wrong. The sound stopped. The silence afterward felt heavier than the noise. I realized then that I wasn't listening for something approaching. I was listening for confirmation that I wasn't the only one hearing it. But there was no one else left. Whatever had made everyone leave had waited until it was quiet enough. Until there was no one left to compare notes with. I put out the fire, packed my things with shaking hands. And when I finally got in my car, I didn't turn the headlights back toward the campground. I pointed them at the road and drove. I didn't stop driving until the trees thinned out. The road felt longer than it should have, empty, unmarked. I kept checking the mirror, half expecting headlights behind me. There were none. By the time I reached the highway, the sky was already lightening. I went straight home. A few days later, I looked up the campground online. Out of curiosity, nothing more. The page had changed. A short notice sat at the top, temporarily closed. No explanation, no dates. Just a line saying the area was unavailable until further notice. I checked local news sites, social media groups, camping forums. People were asking questions. No one was answering them. One post mentioned hearing something late at night. Another said they'd woken up and packed without talking to anyone else. Most of the posts were deleted within a day. I drove past the campground once, weeks later, in daylight. A metal barrier blocked the entrance. A new sign hung crooked on the post. No warnings, no details, just closed. I didn't stop to read it, because I already knew what unsettled me the most. It wasn't what people thought they heard. It was the fact that everyone heard it, and they all decided to leave, at the same time. I chose the campsite because it was quiet. Too quiet for a weekend, maybe, but that was the point. Only 2 other sites were marked as occupied when I checked the map, both farther down the loop, out of sight. I set up my tent just before sunset. The air was still, no wind, no insects. It felt like the kind of silence that presses against your ears. While I was tightening one of the straps, I heard a voice. Not close, not loud, just someone talking somewhere deeper in the trees. I couldn't make out the words, only the tone. Casual, unbothered. I stood up and listened. The voice stopped. I waited a second, then called out, "Hey!" My voice carried farther than I expected. A moment passed. Then a response came back. "Hey!" Same word, same tone, but wrong. It was slower, like it had waited to make sure I'd finished speaking first. I frowned and looked toward the trees. "Everything good over there?" I asked. Again, a pause. Then, "Everything good over there?" The words were the same, but the cadence wasn't. Each syllable landed a fraction of a second late, too deliberate, like someone repeating something they'd just heard, instead of answering it. I stood there longer than I meant to. The trees didn't move. No footsteps approached. No one stepped into view. I told myself it was just someone messing around. Another camper, bored, drunk. Still, when I went back to what I was doing, I kept my voice low, and I didn't call out again. I finished setting up without making a sound. At least, I tried to. Every movement felt louder than it should have. Fabric brushing fabric, metal clicking softly. I cleared my throat once. Just a habit. A second later, it came back. A soft sound from the trees. Not a cough, not a voice. Just the shape of the sound. Short, dry, wrong. I froze. "Okay," I said quietly, mostly to myself. The word came back. "Okay." Same volume, same distance as before, but stretched slightly, like it had been pulled thin. I reached for my water bottle and took a sip. The cap clicked when I twisted it closed. A click answered from the woods, not an echo, an imitation. I picked up a metal tent stake and tapped it gently against a rock. One tap. The sound came back. One tap. Same spacing, same pause. I didn't do it again. I stood there, listening, trying to hear movement, footsteps, branches breaking. There was nothing. No one stepping closer, no one stepping away. Just the quiet space between sounds. I realized then that whatever was responding wasn't guessing. It was waiting, listening closely, learning which sounds were mine. I sat down and forced myself to be still. For a long time, nothing happened. Then, without me making a sound at all, I heard it again. A soft breath, not close, but closer than before. I stayed still longer than was comfortable. My legs started to ache. My back tightened. I didn't shift my weight, didn't clear my throat, didn't even swallow. The forest stayed quiet. Then I moved my hand, just an inch. Fabric brushed softly against my jacket. The sound came back, but not right away. It hesitated. Too long to be an echo, too short to be coincidence. The sound it made wasn't the same. It was flatter, dragged, like the idea of the sound, not the sound itself. I felt a chill run up my arms. I exhaled slowly through my nose. A breath answered, but it came out wrong, too long, too wet, as if it had started too late and tried to catch up. I whispered without meaning to, "Stop." The word came back, "St-op," split in the middle, broken. I stood up, heart hammering now, and took a step back toward my tent. The sound followed. Not footsteps, the soft scrape of fabric, delayed, misplaced. I stopped. It stopped. But something else continued. A low sound, not loud, continuous, like breathing that didn't need lungs. I realized then that whatever was copying me wasn't trying to talk anymore. It wasn't trying to sound human. It was trying to sound like me, and it was getting worse the longer it listened. I stopped making noise, completely. I didn't move, didn't breathe through my mouth, didn't let my clothes shift. I stood there in the dark, counting seconds in my head. 10, 20. Nothing answered. Relief crept in slowly, careful, suspicious. Maybe it needed sound to work. Maybe silence was enough. I stayed like that until my lungs started to burn. When I finally took a breath, I did it carefully, slow, controlled. The forest answered anyway. A breath came back, not delayed this time. Immediate, too immediate. I felt my stomach drop. I hadn't made a sound loud enough to copy. I hadn't made a sound at all. I backed up a step. No fabric brushed, no gravel shifted. The sound still came. A soft movement, close. Not footsteps, more like something adjusting its position, as if it had been waiting for permission to get closer. I pressed my lips together and held my breath again. The answering sound continued, not copying now, maintaining, like it didn't need me anymore. I realized then that whatever had been responding wasn't learning anymore. It had learned enough. It knew the timing, the rhythm, the shape of my silence, and it didn't need me to start first. I moved toward my tent without turning my back to the trees. Slow, careful. Each step felt like a decision I couldn't undo. I unzipped the tent just enough to slip inside. The fabric whispered. The sound came back. Not from the trees this time, from somewhere closer, inside the campsite. I froze with one knee on the ground. The zipper sound came again. Too close to be coincidence. But wrong. The pitch was off. The timing was late. Like someone had learned the idea of the sound, without understanding what made it happen. I crawled fully inside and zipped the tent shut. The sound followed. A soft scrape, fabric against fabric, from outside. Then something else. A breath. Right at the edge of the tent wall. I held mine. The breath didn't stop. It stayed there, even, patient. Then I heard something that made my hands go numb. A sound I recognized immediately. My own cough, the one I always tried to suppress. Low, short. It came from the wrong height, too close to the ground. I pressed my forehead into my knees and stayed perfectly still. The coughing sound came again, then stopped. The breathing continued, closer now, as if whatever was there had finished learning and was ready to use it. I didn't wait for morning. I packed without turning on a light. Didn't unzip the tent all the way. Didn't make a sound unless I had to. The breathing stayed outside while I moved. Not closer, not farther, just present. When I finally stepped out, the campsite looked the same. Empty, still. Nothing stood where the sound had been. I walked backward to my car, opened the door slowly, closed it softer than I thought possible. The engine started on the first try. The sound didn't come back. Not then. I drove out of the campground without looking in the mirrors. The road felt longer than it should have, the dark thicker. I told myself it was over once I reached the highway. Once there were other cars, other sounds. For a while, that worked. Weeks passed. I stopped thinking about the trip, stopped replaying it at night. Until one evening, much later, when I was home alone. No wind, no TV, just the quiet. I cleared my throat. A habit. A second later, from somewhere inside the apartment, not an echo, not outside, a soft sound answered, short, dry, wrong. I stood there perfectly still, and this time, I didn't make another sound to see if it would answer again. If you've been camping before, you know how quiet it can get at night. The kind of quiet where every sound feels closer than it should. And once you notice it, it's hard to stop listening. Some people say the safest thing to do is leave before morning. Others say it doesn't matter where you go, because sometimes whatever answered you out there doesn't stay behind. The next story is worse.